J. Lopez Leaves Los Angeles County by David Smith, quoting from the saga of Rancho El Tejon by Frank F. Latta. It was the Avila family who encouraged me to bring my sheep to the San Joaquin Valley. Their original location was the old Rancho San Pedro of Antonio Maria Avila, and their home was about a mile north of present 1936, Compton. When I was a boy, I can remember as early as 1860, Don Denorio Avila used to come by Lopez Station west of San Fernando, going to and from his camp on the south shore of Kern Lake. When I came to the San Joaquin Valley in 1873, they had a tule-roofed one-room, half-dug out near the shore of the lake, a shallow dug well, a pole corral, and a small pole tile roof shelter for the saddle horses. The Avilas principally ran horses on Kern Lake. Theirs was the first stock ranges in that part of the valley, earlier than the Tejon, for the Avilas started ranging there before 1840, years before I was born, and before any land grants had been made in the San Joaquin Valley. The Avila place was known far and wide as Camp of the Avilas. Of course, the Avilas never owned any land there. They only exercised a possessory right. While I was clerking in John Lazarovich's store in Los Angeles, Don Denorio Avila and his son Ignacio used to stop in and buy supplies when going to the Joaquin. They told me many stories about the wonderful possibilities for stock raising around Kern Lake. We came horseback in August of 1872 over the Fiddler's Trail, Violin Canyon, and Canada de las Uvas to Rancho Canoa, then operated by Hudson and Rosemeyer. We arrived there early in the morning after having spent the night at Fort Tejon. Never had I seen feed such as existed on these plains that summer. A wagon load of alfileria could have been raked up at any place, and the whole country was white with the stalks of wild oats. We both decided that if I could be certain of water, it would be a fine location for my sheep. In 1872, there were thousands of loose tame stock on these plains besides the antelope, elk, and wild horses. Black bears were numerous in the mountains then, and antelope were seen on the plains. There would be bands of 200 or 300, no, more than that, 1,000. They roamed the desert and looked like herds of cattle or horses in the distance. We would see them coming down for water. We were not bothered with coyotes, although there were plenty of them. Once in a while a coyote might kill a lamb, but they preyed mostly on the ground squirrels. On our return trip to San Fernando, Rafael Lopez and I stopped for a few days at the rancho of my uncle Chico Lopez. This was at what is now called Elizabeth Lake. After listening to her account of the possibilities of raising stock in the San Joaquin Valley, Chico offered to let me have 2,000 of his yearling ewes on shares for 5 years, with half of the lambs and the wolves besides. That would allow me to go into business with no capital at all. Chico had more sheep than he could manage, and he thought that would be a good deal for him too. I probably had $20 in cash, a good horse and riding rig, owned outright, about 1/4 of a band of sheep that I had been running on shares for my father, and had a small tent that I had purchased with my labor from John Lazarovich in his store in Los Angeles. It looked like an easy start and that I would be sure to succeed, provided my health held out. And it was an easy start. I did succeed financially, and my health held out, for here I am still in good health more than 60 years later. We returned to San Fernando, and I told my father and mother what I had decided to do. Although I was almost 20 years of age, in their eyes I still was just a child and sick besides. My father objected. He said, "I have given you a good education. Now do you think I want you to go herd sheep?" But Tio Chico persuaded me. There were many things to arrange, and it was more than a year before I landed on the sinks of the San Emigdio, alone, afoot, and with my entire possessions, including groceries and tent, packed on a burro loaned me by Uncle Chico. When I arrived in the south end of the San Joaquin Valley with my sheep in November of 1871, one of the first persons I met was Alex Godey, the Frenchman who was a guide for Fremont. Godey then occupied San Emigdio. I visited with the natives at Pueblo de San Emigdio and inquired about the water. They told me that Mr. Godey controlled the water and that he didn't like sheepmen. This last they emphasized very strongly. They also told me that Godey allowed the water to run down at certain times only to fill the reservoirs and to irrigate their little gardens. So I decided to go up and see Mr. Godey. Leaving my sheep in the care of an Indian whom I'd met at San Emigdio and whom I knew from San Fernando, I walked up to Mr. Godey's ranch house, now the headquarters of the Kern County Land Company at San Emigdio. I was admitted to the house by an Indian boy and met Mr. Godey. I introduced myself to him and told him of my difficulties about the water. I recollected that my father had told me to see Mr. Godey, that he had known Godey. So I told Mr. Godey what my father had said about seeing him. Godey was very polite and genteel, and not at all what I expected after listening to the natives at the Pueblo. He questioned me closely about my sheep and then about my father. When he learned who my father was, he was as friendly as could be. You see, I had to identify myself quite closely, as there probably were 100 men named Lopez around Los Angeles in the Tejon country, and Mr. Godey probably knew half of them. As soon as Mr. Godey was certain which Lopez was my father, he said, "So you are a son of Don Geronimo Lopez. I knew him well when I was with Fremont, and he ran horses on my ranch in the Cuyama Valley. I consider him one of my closest friends. I heard you were here with your sheep, but I didn't know who you were." For about a year, I moved my camp and sheep from place to place where feed and water both were available. Then I sold most of my share of the sheep to General Beal and took over management of the sheep operation on El Tejon Ranchos. End of this chapter.